All right, it is showing 6:33 on my clock. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, we just want to thank you all for joining us. Welcome to SNYPA's session on preparing for graduate school. So we're going to start off by introducing our panel for tonight. And we're first going to talk about doctoral programs, then we're going to be talking about Psy.D programs, and then we're going to be talking about master's programs in in psychology. Sorry. So I'm going to first turn it over to Dr. Pollock.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pollock. I am a clinical psychologist and a psychology professor at Utica University. And I worked as a clinical psychologist primarily before I did the full-time professor thing. So I can talk a bit about that process, being a clinical psychologist. And one thing I think we would all love to hear from everybody in the audience if you want to put in the chat what college or university you're coming from.
Thank you. Dr. Shiner?
Okay, hello everyone. I can see the names of a bunch of my students there, so I know you're behind those blank rectangles. So I'm a professor at Colgate, and I've taught here for over 25 years. And my PhD is in clinical psychology, but I opted to go the research teaching route from the beginning. But I did check in with a PhD student today at the University of Minnesota in their child clinical program. So anyhow, I wanted to get a really up-to-date picture of grad school from her, as well as getting to hear from Ashley.
Thank you. So, hi, everybody. My name's Michelle Story. I have my PhD in school psychology, and I worked as a school psychologist for 18 years before joining the faculty at SUNY Oswego. I run the SUNY Oswego School Psychology Master's Program. And I'm going to turn it over to Ashley next, the first of our students.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley. I am a fifth-year clinical psychology PhD student at Syracuse University. I'm in a lab that's more child-focused and related to ADHD research, but I'm hoping to go into a clinically focused career. And we'll talk a little bit about like preparing to grad school, and what being a PhD student is like.
Thank you. Next, we're going to turn it over to Derek.
Everyone, my name is Derek. I'm a second year graduate student, doctoral trainee at Point Park University's clinical psych track. Graduated from Utica University, and Dr. Pollock is one of my mentors.
Thank you. And Matt.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Quattrapani. I am currently a school psychology student at SUNY Oswego. That is for a master's program. And I'm excited to chat with you all today.
Thank you. So those will be the panelists for tonight. So we're going to start off, like I said, first talking about PhD programs. Then we're going to talk about Psy.D programs and then master's programs. And then we will open it up for questions. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley.
Sure. So just kind of like a general overview of PhD, like specifically clinical psychology programs, although I know like there's PhDs in school psych. I'm going to talk a little bit more about clinical psych just because that's what I'm doing and familiar with. Generally speaking, they're a mix of training for both research, like teaching slash academics, and then also for clinical practice. So it gives you training in all three types of disciplines. And many people tend to kind of specialize in what they want to do, either like getting more training during the graduate program or after the fact in their career. But in general, grad school for PhD clinical psychologists let you do a mix of training in all three disciplines. There's also a lot of coursework, a lot of research, and a lot of applied clinical work that you do throughout the graduate training. For people that decide to go a clinical route, it also will provide route to getting licensed to get a license to independently practice when you graduate and then also complete a licensing exam. So that's a route for someone that's more clinical or hoping to get licensed, even if that's not primarily what you're doing. So there's lots of different options of what it will give you after the graduate school life. Getting into graduate school kind of before then linearly. Generally, most of the PhD programs you apply to in the fall, and then we'll work on submitting applications. And then this is the current interview time. So Syracuse is actually this week and next week interviewing for our prospective students for graduate school. Usually people that we see that are coming in currently to interview have a lot of research experience. So even if long term your career goal isn't research, you have to do a lot of it for PhD programs. So I tend to see a lot of people having substantial research experience, meaning like at least 2 to 3 years from the people that at least we're getting to interview. When I was preparing, I'll also say I also graduated from Utica University, Derek, back when it was Utica College, and I had done about 4 years of research in one of the research labs there. It wasn't necessarily clinical research, it was like animal neuropsych research, and neuroscience research, but that was something that just gave me the skills to learn what it means to really develop your own research study, to show that I have an understanding of like the ethical process to get approvals for research studies. I had some experience with presentations. So if you're somebody that is maybe thinking about a PhD route, you definitely want to try to get earlier research experience under your belt. It's also not uncommon from talking to like other people that I know currently in graduate school or the prospective students that we see for people to take gap years where they work as research assistants. I personally didn't do that just because I had done a lot of research in undergrad. But if you are, say, like a senior or a junior and you haven't really done that, I think figuring out ways to maybe maximize the rest of your time to get research experience or find a research assistant position somewhere or a fellowship somewhere would probably be a good route to prepare yourself well for graduate school. And I think that's both to get the interview and also to, once you get in there, have it be more of a smooth transition because you definitely start working on things research-wise pretty much right away. Once you're in graduate school, what that for me looked like was the first 3 years were really class intensive. So taking 3 to 4 classes per semester, as well as taking steps to work on your master's thesis. So for our program, you do a master's, then a qualifying exam, then your PhD dissertation. So you kind of get a master's along the way in the program. So pretty much from the onset, you start on the master's independent research while you're taking classes that are mix of clinical application and also like broad psychology classes. So you'll take like still some biopsychosocial classes, you'll take social psychology, you'll take an ethics course, and get like a lot of just broadband experience as well as learning how to do applied clinical skills. Then in our 3rd year, we start having full caseloads of therapy clients as well as learning assessment techniques. And then after that, at least in our program, we go out into the community, get to work on different external sites and kind of specialize in clinical careers. So for instance, I'm currently doing some autism assessments and developmental disability diagnoses. And that's something that for Syracuse, we have a relationship with somebody in the community and can get more of that applied experience. And that kind of depends on like different places and universities that you're at, what kinds of things you might have exposure to. So that's kind of a good thing to think about when you're applying to schools of if there is a research lab that you're really interested in and potentially like clinical sites that you would be interested in to get experience with. But you get training in doing all of those types of things. In general, programs, it seems like the median amount of time you're in grad school for PhDs is 5 years on campus, then a 6th year that is an internship year, which is kind of like med school residency. That's one full clinical year. So that's pretty typical of most programs. There are some that are like a 3-year on campus and a 4th-year internship. Some people stay a little bit longer if they're doing more like research intensive positions, if they have grants that they're trying to fill out for research. That kind of depends on the person and what their goals are or what their program is. But you can expect that it's probably going to be like 6 years until you're done from the start of grad school to the end. So it is kind of a long haul, but like I said, it gives you a lot of options at the end of it. I feel like that's kind of a broad overview, and I'll let Dr. Shiner maybe like add in anything else you'd want about it. But I'm happy at the end to answer questions about life in graduate school or why I made that decision, things more personal to that. I'm happy to speak about.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashley, for giving all that great detail about kind of the structure of your program and the background you had before you applied. I wanted to say a couple of things about the decision to go to a PhD program versus other options. So I think part of what makes the decision about the kind of graduate school to pursue so complicated is because there are so many different options. And I also think that it can be really hard to actually fully know what you like until you try doing it. So, I mean, in my case, I was pretty confident that I was going to become a practicing clinician when I went to graduate school, and I really underestimated how much I was going to love teaching and doing research. Um, but so there are a lot of options, and there are certainly much faster ways to get to the point of being able to do clinical work than pursuing a PhD. And so if you feel fairly confident that you definitely want to do clinical work and you're pretty sure that you want to do therapy primarily, it can be worth considering other options besides a doctoral degree. There's an interesting change that the American Psychological Association is currently putting into place, where they are starting to accredit master's programs in psychology with the intention of helping to move psychology training for direct clinical work like therapy down to the master's level. That is still really a new initiative. And so if you are planning on applying soon, that may not apply to you. But there are other good options um, besides the PhD. So nonetheless, as Ashley said, the PhD is a really versatile option. I think especially if you are not quite sure what you might want to do. If you have genuine interests in different kinds of clinical work, if you think you may enjoy doing teaching or research or having a career that combines them, then I think it can be a really good option because there are actually a lot of careers where people can be doing some clinical work, but in addition, be doing all kinds of other things like doing consulting or doing some teaching or some research as well. Um, so let's see, a few things maybe to add. So I think Ashley did a really good job of talking about the importance of getting research. I think that that is important for a few reasons. One is that these programs don't admit a lot of students each year. And so the faculty are really thinking about who is going to be able to contribute to their research program and who can they successfully mentor in a way where they're kind of contributing to the development of the next generation. And so I think they really want to have students who they know have done research, have fairly well-defined interests in terms of what they are hoping to pursue, the kinds of questions that they want to ask. Um, I know for me, most of my students at Colgate end up taking 2 years off before going. I would say that Ashley's path is a little unusual for my students. In that they typically have to work, whether it's as a volunteer or full time as a research assistant for a couple of years. I personally did that, and I was so grateful, I guess, by the time I got to graduate school that I had done that because I felt like I came into it with a better sense of my interests and also having gained some real world experience before I went. Um, Let me see if there are a couple of other things to add. The student that I talked to today, as I mentioned, she's in her 5th year at the University of Minnesota. And she wanted me to say to all of you a couple of things. One is that it's really important to nurture relationships with your mentors. Um, before heading to graduate school, because I think that it really makes a difference in terms of your development as a person and in terms of the kinds of letters that you're going to be able to get. So that was one thing she mentioned. Another is that she has found it to be very common for people to have to apply more than once. And even in the program that she's in, which is a very competitive program, yeah, a very large number of people had to apply more than once, and so that you should not feel discouraged if if that is what you end up having to do. Um, and let me see. And then the other thing she mentioned is that it's really not necessary to have a full-time research assistant position after you graduate. Again, because it's possible to volunteer even part-time, even unpaid in a lab, um, rather than necessarily getting a full-time research coordinator position. So in her case, she actually went a really unusual route and attended seminary and was doing research while she was doing that. So I'm sure Ashley and Professor Pollack and I are all happy to answer any questions that you all have in follow-up.
Thank you, Dr. Shiner. And what I just added in the chat is just many doctoral programs do provide funding. That's why I know Dr. Shiner was speaking to the competitive nature of doctoral programs. And a large part of that can be because oftentimes there can be tuition remission in exchange for working as a research or graduate assistant. And so those spots can be limited. And that also, I think, contributes to some of the competitive nature of a PhD program. So thank you. And again, we're eager to answer questions. We're going to move next to Psy.D programs. But if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll also be asking for questions at the end as well. So Derek.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think after listening to Dr. Shiner and Ashley talk, wrote down a couple notes, and I think Dr. Shiner had a good point in saying that before you start applying, or like the first step in the application process would be trying to figure out whether you want to orient yourself towards a career working directly with clients or maybe something into the more research or academic realm. That's not to say that a Psy.D program can't do both. Myself, I'm personally interested in working in academia after I graduate, but my main focus now and then when I was in the application process was finding a program where I could get clinical training and get appropriate training that could line me up with a career that I could get working directly with clients. Some other kind of tips and tricks for applying, things that I kind of paid attention to or tried to prioritize, was finding a program that aligned with my interests and that was obviously APA accredited. So one of the big things for me was that I wanted to go into a humanistic program, and that could be anything from like a classical Rogerian humanistic to psychodynamic. My personal interest is in existential therapy. So Point Park has a really good foundation for existential therapy. So that's something that drove me towards applying here, and to Duquesne in Pittsburgh. That moves on to the next point, which is location. You don't want to apply to a place, a university or a program where you do not want to live or that is not feasible for you to live. A big thing for the Psy.D program that's different than the PhD program is that we do not have tuition remission. They do have graduate assistantships, and that can help. In my case, that was only for the first year. So you will be taking out a little bit more in student loans. I think by the end of mine, it'll be about 100 grand in student loans to get my Psy.D. So that's a big difference. If you're worried about financials or paying off student loans, that's something you have to consider in your decision to go to a Psy.D versus a PhD track. Another major focus when I was in the application process was looking at faculty at the universities where I was applying. Faculty are your mentors and they can be your friends, and they can also be aligned towards professional tracks after professional opportunities after you graduate. A big part of that is looking at their research, both past and current. Does their research align with things that you might want to do research-wise? Do their clinical interests align with what your clinical interests are? This doesn't mean that every faculty member needs to have the same interests as you, because there's a breadth of interests, and I think that's a strength of a program like mine. But I did look to see, okay, I know I would have to have an advisor at my program. I know I'd have to have a dissertation chair. I want to find a program that has faculty that aligns with my interests when I'm applying. And that carries through. It carries through in the application process, and it carries through in the interview process once you get an application or once you apply and get an interview, hopefully. Um, a big part of the interview process is aligning your interests with the interests of the faculty members and with the interests of the program. But another big part of that is just showcasing your personality. I think one of the best pieces of advice I got in terms of interviewing, both for the doctoral program track, but also just interviewing in general, is if you secured the interview, they're looking for your personality. They want to assess whether you can communicate effectively to other people, whether you're personable, whether you get along with other people. Sometimes they have single interviews or a multiple interview process where you go through group interviews as well. Um, don't get too nervous. Focus on the fact that you got there and you can do it, and they're looking for your personality. What are some other things? Oh, another slight difference from the Psy.D track to the Ph.D track is Ph.D. I think Ashley said it was about 6 years for her program. The Psy.D program is a bit more expedited, so we are between a 4 and a 5 year track. So if you really want to expedite your process, you can graduate, I think, right at 4 years, and or you can extend it into a year-long internship at year 5. Um, so yeah, a little bit shorter, but the caveat to that is that there is no tuition remission, so it's a little bit more expensive. Let's see what else I've read. Oh, research experience. I think that was a really good point too. Although Psy.D programs are more clinically focused, I do think that having research experience under your belt is an important factor. One, to show that you do have that experience or that knowledge or that skill base, but also because you will be doing a dissertation. That is still something you'll be doing at a Psy.D program, just like at a PhD program, is you will have to conduct a research study in order to graduate. So coming in with experience shows that you already have that under your belt and you can grow in that. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are at a deficit either, because as long as you put that as a growth edge and you express your interest in that kind of area, I think that's can still aid you in the application process. Yeah, so I'm a year 2 student, so I'll move from the application process, kind of like just a little bit about my experience. So I'm a year 2 student. Year 1 at this program in specific was really focused on understanding the field of psychology, taking a critical look at the current field of psychology, and in particular, clinical psychology and psychotherapy. Um, Assessing what it means for societal norms and how that impacts treatment and how that impacts what we consider psychopathology. That was a big focus, especially in my program in year 1. And another thing is for more of a clinical focus instead of a critical focus, understanding basic common factors. That was a major piece of the first year program, and understanding yourself, because when you want to work as a clinician with other people, you are bringing yourself into the room. That was a major thing at my program that they taught the first year, was that there's not something as a purely objective stance that you can take in a room with someone. You're a person meeting another person, and that matters. So understanding yourself and understanding your value system will infer on how you meet people in the room when you're doing therapy. Ethics courses were taken year 1 as well. And a lot of focus on theory pertaining to psychotherapy. The first year is really to get a handle on what your theoretical orientation might be, meaning essentially what is the theory you pull upon when you're in a room? How do you conceptualize clients? How do you understand psychopathology, human suffering, all that jazz? Year 2 is continuing learning that theory, and then including your first step into like research methods. So at my program, we are tackling both quantitative and qualitative research methods. So we learn about them independently. And in the quantitative course, we also learn about mixed methods research. So again, this is a Psy.D program that is taking time to focus on teaching clinicians how to do good research. And I think that's important. Um, and I think it's especially important in like a community focus as well, which is a strength of my program, which is that you take your clinical expertise and your expertise as a researcher, and then you apply that into a community context. Try to view people holistically and view issues holistically as well. Year two is also when you'll start in a Psy.D program, start clinical practicums. So like right now I'm in my office at the UCC, which is the University Counseling Center at Point Park. So this is my first practicum experience. So that's something I've looked forward to is getting better at those interviews during this application process for the doctoral programs, because you will continue to do those interviews throughout your course of um, throughout the course of the program, really, each year. So you have a different site each year, and you'll try to gather as much experience working with different populations as you can, and also take that as a learning experience to hone in not only how you want to work with clients, but what populations you might want to work with. I'll pass it off to Dr. Pollock to fill in anything I might have missed, which I'm sure will be something.
Of course, because there's so many things. That's why we're doing this, because six heads is better than one. There's just a lot to keep track of. So no, I think all of you filled out a lot of the pieces, but a couple things I noted that I wanted to make sure to communicate is as Derek and Ashley both talked about, the Psy.D is typically less time. I think that last time I looked at the averages, this might have, I don't know, Ashley, maybe it went down since you looked at it, but the Ph.D was like 7 years when I was in it, and then the Psy.D was like 5 years. Maybe it's, or it might be more 6 at like SU. They get you guys through it faster. But I just say that only because, again, when you're considering the cost of Psy.D versus Ph.D, yes, Psy.Ds tend to be in general more expensive because you don't get tuition remission. So you're paying for tuition, whereas you're not paying for tuition for the traditional research-based PhD program. But somehow I still racked up a bunch of debt in my PhD clinical psychology where I did have tuition remission and I did have a stipend. Which, at the time was, so you'll get, in a traditional PhD program, you get the tuition remission and then you get a salary for either working in your research lab or teaching undergraduates, which is what I did. We each taught a course every semester. And, but we only had guaranteed funding for 3 years. And remember, the program is, if you don't count internship, it's 6 years. Then I was able to get funding for a 4th year. I got another fellowship. Sometimes there's other like fellowships and funding kind of floating around. And then I was able to, I think, teach as an adjunct in my 5th year, but that's usually not that much money. And then the stipend itself is not a lot of money. It's like barely a living wage. It's pretty low. And so how did I rack up debt? Just like, because you're an adult. And so you have rent and you have your car payment and your, whatever, you have all of the things. So I would just take out, a little bit of loans every semester to kind of make up the difference. And it added up over the years. So it's not like in a PhD program, you're going to come out necessarily debt free. So I just want to put that out there. So when you're doing, when you're looking at both, like there's online calculators, for example, that you can look at, if the tuition is going to cost me this much, or if like what my stipend is going to be, if I think from my living expenses, I'm going to need to take out in loans like an extra 10,000 a year or something like that. Like make sure you do that math and do those numbers because, it's not like one is free and one is more expensive. Like they both will come at a cost. And it also depends on where you're going to be living, like what city you're going to be living in. I was so sad to hear, like with Derek, I mean, Pittsburgh's a great city, but it got really expensive over the years since I was there because I did my grad work in Pittsburgh 25 years ago and it was super, super cheap, even though, again, like I said, I still racked up this debt. So, when Derek's there now and he was telling me when he was first moving there, like what the rents were, my jaw dropped to the floor. And so, where you're going to be living in the country, like if you go to a grad program in New York City, for example, Again, even if it's a PhD program where they're giving you tuition remission, you are probably going to have to take out a lot of student loans to cover the extra expenses of having to live near Manhattan. And versus maybe if you go somewhere like in the Midwest where the cost of living is very low, you could consider that as well. So I wanted to say that. And then one more thing I wanted to say is talking about the internship for clinical psych PhD and clinical psych Psy.D. And also that will include counseling psych PhD and usually. um, and yes. And so what the internship is pretty much after it's like your last year usually of your doctoral program. And it's a whole nother application process in and of itself. And yeah, so as Derek said, like you're going to be doing more interviews and more applications, and it's a huge universal application that you have to like have all of your hours tracked in all the different clinical activities you do, plus talk about your research, plus talk about your theoretical orientation. There's like 5 essays that you have to answer, at least 3 letters of recommendation, 4 essays. Yeah. So that's a pretty big process. You shouldn't have to worry about that now, but I just mentioned it like that's also that last year. The good thing about the internship year is you will get paid for that year. You're going to be working in some kind of setting full time. Like we have one here in Syracuse at SUNY. Actually, we have 3 in Syracuse, one at the VA, one at SUNY Upstate Medical University, and one at Hutchings. And you're working, as a clinician primarily, and you're getting paid by that institution. It's still nowhere near what a regular, fully licensed psychologist gets paid, but it's usually higher than what a stipend would be in graduate school. So it's a little bit better. So you may not have to take out a loan for that year at least. And you'll get like health insurance and things like that because you're an employee of that institution, of wherever you got your internship. And the thing about those internships, that's where all of the doctoral programs come together in one bucket. So like Derek and Ashley, even though Derek's in a Psy.D program and she's in a clinical psych PhD program, they're both applying to APIC internships in their last year. They won't be applying the same year because they're a little bit staggered, but they're all applying to the same internships. And the internships look at, all of those applicants in the same bucket. So they're applying together because everybody, like Derek's going to be a clinical psychologist and Ashley's going to be a clinical psychologist. So they're going to end up with the same title and the same career depending on where they go. But right now they're starting off in those different pathways, if that makes sense. And so that internship process has its own accreditation process. And, that's why they have a common app and everyone kind of goes through that same process. And one last thing about accreditation. You don't have to worry about internship accreditation yet. That's something to worry about after you get into one of these programs and you're in like your 3rd or 4th year and you start applying. But APA accreditation for the doctoral programs is something you should think about now. Make sure that your program, well, try to make sure that your program is APA accredited. Because if it's not that you shouldn't necessarily do it. You just have to be aware of that could cause you some problems down the line when applying for the internship and then later if you want to get licensed, applying for licensure. So each state where you're going to be a licensed psychologist they grant you licensure after you prove that you've had the education and you've done the clinical hours and you pass a licensure exam. And one of the things that they look at is whether you went to an APA accredited program. And if you didn't, it's not necessarily that you can't get licensed, but you might have to do a lot of extra legwork to prove that you're sort of like licensed eligible. So there's just a lot of things down the line that if you go to a non-APA accredited program, could cause more of a hassle and a headache. And the APA accreditation also ensures that it's a really good program. It's solid. They're ethical. They have the curriculum follows the APA recommended guidelines. So it's a good gold standard to have as well. All right, so I'll stop there so that we can hear about the master's programs now.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Alrighty, so much good information was said by each individual so far. I feel like I got things all over the place that I want to talk about. Just to reiterate the importance of accreditation by APA for your program, I know that my master's program is accredited for school psychology, and that is just really, really important when you're applying to those programs. So I think a good place to talk is about just my experience so far. So I am currently in my first year in a school psych program, and so far it has been a lot of foundation, but at the same time, the workload is much more intensive. And I actually just started a practicum in my first year, so this all varies based on the program that you get into. So I know that I have a practicum this year, another practicum next year, and I also have an internship in my final year. So the internship will be 5 days a week in my third year after I have acquired a bunch of knowledge from all of my courses and my professors. And really, there's also other options in master's programs too. So I also have the option to get a CAS, which is a certificate of advanced study. And that basically allows me to study another area that I'm interested in a little more specifically, and it's sort of attached that to like me as a school psychologist. In general, master's programs can range from like 1 to 3 years, and there's different types. So you have Masters of Arts programs, Masters of Science programs, and your Masters of Arts programs are going to tend to lean more towards those humanities and social sciences and fine arts, whereas your Masters of Science will be a little more scientific, maybe a little more qualitative and a little more research based. And based on what you're deciding to do following your master's, or what you'd like to become, it's very important that you choose MS or MA accordingly. I personally don't have a huge interest in research following my graduation, so I chose a Master's of Arts program. Some other things that were touched on that also apply to master's program, besides your program being accredited, it's really important to look, at the faculty in your programs. So that's something that I definitely looked at when I was applying to SUNY Oswego. These, like as Derek mentioned, these are going to be your mentors. These are going to be individuals that you're going to, look up to. They're going to teach you a wealth of the knowledge that you learn over your course, and they can always be individuals you can reach out to in the future as well. A lot of colleges, when you're applying, they have their graduation track sort of online, so you can look at the classes that you might be taking when you apply to that school. And they usually also list their faculty as well. Let's see what else I have here. Yeah, really look for graduate assistantships, fellowships. I know this was also touched on, but really anything that you can do to support your, financial needs while you're navigating the program. As mentioned before, there's car payments, phone payments, tuition bills, and that stuff starts adding up rapidly. I know I have a couple of friends in my master's program that are doing GA-ships and sort of getting scholarships and funding that way. So that's really important. Yeah. I don't know if Dr. Story has anything else that she'd like to really dive into.
Well, thank you. That was a wonderful overview. So, like Matt shared, master's programs can range anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So, for example, for the school psychology program, as well as in SUNY Oswego's counseling and psych services department, there's also a school counseling and a mental health counseling master's program. And so those tend to fall about 2.5 years for those programs. The school psych program is longer because there's a full year paid internship for that third year. So it's coursework for the first 2 years, and then it's a full-time internship that third year. So as far as most master's programs, there can be funding, but their funding opportunities may be harder to find. And for example, most of the graduate assistantships, at least at SUNY Oswego, do not provide full tuition remission, with the exception of specific grants that universities may have. So typically there may be a graduate assistantship, but it may just provide partial tuition remission and a small stipend. And typically, as far as the competitive nature, Master's programs are often easier to get into than a Psy.D or a Ph.D program, though you'd be surprised it's gotten much more competitive. For example, we have 15 spots in our program and we're reviewing over 60 applications for our current application cycle for the fall. So, one of the pieces, even though research, folks who are very interested in research, you can still do research at the master's level, but if research is your passion and that's something you want to do, a PhD or Psy.D program may be a better route for you. Also, most master's programs do not have teaching assistantships. So if you're interested in teaching, and you think you may want to serve as a teaching assistant or teach a course, that also I would say would be more of a PhD or Psy.D route to take. But the benefit of a master's program is it's shorter. It can be less expensive, particularly if you look at state universities. Obviously, with private institutions, there can be greater costs, but typically there are fewer graduate assistantships, or even if they have those, they're not paid in full. And many times it's really gearing you towards experiences for getting into the field faster. But I would say a lot of the qualities, I know Ashley was talking about some of the skills they were looking for, to get into a PhD program. So typically for a master's program, still strong communication skills, leadership skills, teamwork, and research and teaching assistant experiences, I think also look strong, even though those might not be options at the master's level. So next, I'm going to open it up to questions. I see we have some questions coming in, and I just want to open it up to the panel too, to ask if there's anything else anybody in the panel would like to share before we open it up fully to questions. All right, so
Yeah, I was also
go ahead.
sorry, Dr. Story. Yeah, I was just gonna say, in regards to preparing for graduate school, I can't stress enough networking. I still talk to the individuals that I had, worked with in my bachelor's degree program, and I still rely on them for advice and recommendations and things of that sort. So that's really important. And I think another very important thing to mention is just finding a work-life balance. Like that's something that you're gonna have to do, no matter what program you go into, because these programs can be stressful and work intensive, and it's important that you still cater to your mental health and do the things that's important to have a good time while you're completing the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, Derek, I thought that was a really good point, and to echo that, Matthew, I think that that's also the same for me of like having those mentors really help to get into graduate school from like having a close relationship and a letter of rec that that person actually knows you and can speak to you as a person instead of like you just sat in the class, but also you can talk with like if they know you well and you have a good relationship, they're really helpful and they've been through it, right? Most of those people have applied to graduate school, and so they can try to help you with the options of your personality and what you want to do and try to figure that out. They might not have all the answers, but a lot of them are really good mirrors to trying to find that next step. So I think that that really is so important just to get where you want to go, but also to figure out where you want to go.
Wonderful. Thank you. We do have a question
Oh.
in the chat. So, one of the participants is curious to know what made Ashley, Derek, and Matt join the programs they're currently in. Have you ever faced doubt before or during your journey into your graduate program? And if so, how did you overcome it or maintain interest in the path you're in? So it's a multi-part question, but I think it's a wonderful one. So we'll start with Ashley, then go to Derek and Matt.
That is a really, really good question. I think the fact that you're asking that question means that you've thought a lot about things. I decided to go a PhD route, I think, partially because I like to have my hands in like a lot of things. I think our joke is like you wear a lot of hats as a psychologist. So like that to me was very appealing that I wanted to continue to learn how to teach and do research and do clinical work. I kind of came in knowing I wanted to do clinical work full time, but didn't want to give up the other things. Similar to, I think, Dr. Shiner, you mentioned, I didn't think I would love teaching as much as I did, but teaching a full course, like I fell in love with it and could see myself adjuncting in the future. And so like for me, going that route was I just really wanted to do all of the things and didn't want to give up any of them. Specifically choosing Syracuse, to the point of like finding the right fit, I love my advisor. I just feel like personally I can go for him to do kind of anything. Like he's not somebody that is saying you have to have a research career. He's really open to me having the professional development of where I want to go. I really wanted to do ADHD focused research, and he's very flexible in like finding a topic that is related to ADHD, but also within a more specific domain of interest. So for me, it was kind of that general fit of a place. I think that that's annoying because people say that in graduate school all the time of it's about the fit, but like it really kind of is because it's also how you're going to be happy there and get what you want out of it. In terms of like roadblocks and it being stressful, I think that just depends on the day. Like there's sometimes times where you're just like incredibly busy. Everything is happening that one week. You're like, why did I do this? I think the first week I started graduate school, I was like, why did I do this? This is such a big change. And I think part of it is like distress tolerance of knowing like when it's a really busy week, it's like the next week is not going to be as busy. Like it always ebbs and flows. So I think part of that's just personal awareness. And I think also I just love what I do. I love meeting with clients, even when there's ones that are tricky or it's a hard case. You feel like you've done all you can in it. There's so many people that you get to see and be privileged to help them. It's so cool and I love what I do. So I think that that's what keeps me going, apart from also just knowing the hard weeks pass.
Yeah, I'll try to remember all the different facets of that question, and if I miss something, I'll be the annoying person to ask for it to be repeated. Um, but I think something a struggle that I had at the beginning of the application process was making the leap in choosing to put forward the time and the money and the effort. Like I think Matthew had a good point that like these are really intense years of your life. Like you will need to find a good work-life balance. Um, and it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And something Dr. Pollock helped me with too is kind of realizing that um, although something like a Psy.D track might cost a little more money in the long run, in comparison to her experience, yeah, there was a lot of similarities. Um, and you'll have an opportunity to pay that money back. So that shouldn't be something to hold you back. But that was my first personal instance of a little bit of doubt. Um, I think going through the program, like the intensity of it is fairly intense, obviously. Um, but for me, the saving grace was getting to work with clients. I think this distress tolerance is a really good point that Ashley brought up, and I think that for me, finding a way to cope with the stress of the program and like the academic sector of the program or portion of it really came from the meaning that I take from working with clients directly. Getting to have someone trust you enough to share like really intimate moments with you and be able to help them through difficult periods of time in their lives um, is something that's really meaningful to me and it has brought me a lot of joy and a sense of purpose. And it has really carried me through the second year of this program. Yeah. This would be the time that I'm going to ask for the question to be repeated so I can see if I hit on all the points.
I actually think you touched on that. So thank you. Appreciate it. Matt, anything you wanted to add what made you choose the program you're in and have you faced doubt and how you overcame that?
Yeah, so I mean, going back to some of the things I touched on before, the faculty up at SUNY Oswego, we got some really great individuals up there, and that definitely played a role in me deciding to go to SUNY Oswego. Additionally, as I mentioned, it was an accredited program, which is like crucial. And the real deciding factor for me to go to SUNY Oswego over other school psychology programs was that as I mentioned, I looked over the course overview and what was expected of me in this program, and I found that our program takes sort of a unique approach as we do counseling in our school psychology program, which many school psychology programs across the state or across the nation don't, add that to the curriculum. And as someone that wants to, maximize my potential as a school psychologist, I know that one of the hats a school psychologist wears is consultation and counseling, and that was just a really big factor for me. In regards to challenges, I mean, everyone knows imposter syndrome. I mean, you're sitting in a classroom, you're looking around individuals that are, respected, all come from unique backgrounds and have unique experiences. So it can feel like, you might be not the brightest bulb in the room, or that, might be, lacking compared to some of the individuals in your cohort. But what's really helped me through that is just listening to each individual's perspective, and understanding that I bring a unique perspective to the classroom, and that, you know, my cohort kind of has, I look at it sort of like a family at this point, because we share perspectives. And I think it's just a safe place, and that has really helped carry me through. And additionally, just that work-life balance. You still got to do the things you love outside. So I try going hiking, I try going fishing, and doing things that I really like to do as well.
Thank you. There's a question that's in the chat that I know folks have been responding to, but I think it's a good question, so I'm going to bring it forward. So, besides research experiences, what do Psy.D and PhD programs look for in applicants? And I think that would be important to talk about. I know I briefly mentioned that for masters, but what else are they looking for?
I would say maturity. And so that's going to come through the interview, because they are going to be relying on you now, to be less supervised than maybe you would have been as an undergraduate, whether it's doing research, teaching, and or clinical work. And so a lot of times also students ask, should you take a gap year or not? I think we kind of touched on that earlier, and students worry that it looks that the committees look down on a gap year, but actually, most of the times, like they actually really value that the students took some time to get some more experience, whether it's a research experience, or maybe if they're applying to a Psy.D program, maybe they got some direct clinical experience through some human service agency or something like that. And it just gives you more time to marinate as an adult and grow and develop. And yeah, they don't usually look down on that. So if you feel like you're not quite ready yet and you want to, have some more growth experiences, it's okay to take 1 or 2 years off, or more even. I mean, I had people in my cohort that were in their 40s because they had worked other careers and then got back into graduate school.
I was going to add to that the grad student I talked to today said that of the about 10 people who are in her cohort, I think 9 of them had taken time off. So the one person I think who went straight on was really kind of unusual.
Yeah, I am an oddity in my program as well. We have a couple of people who came straight out of graduate school, but that isn't the norm. I think that many people take just different paths to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I also am not on committees, but I would imagine that like seeing that people do a lot of things, like if you're involved in organizations or leadership, or like you have some clinical or job experience, like it just kind of shows you can juggle multiple things. And I would imagine that that's perceived well because you're very busy in graduate school. So if you're doing a lot of things in undergrad, they might see that as maturity, that you can balance your time really well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But I would add to that, I feel like often in high school, there's such a focus on doing extracurriculars as if, as a way of getting into your undergraduate program. And I think it's just important to emphasize that it's even though I think it's great to have had a job, or to be able to show that you've juggled a bunch of things, the role of extracurriculars, it's just not an important part of the application process, but rather what it indicates about you, that you've been engaged in a lot of things.
Yeah, and just to jump in real quick, at the master's level, I also took a 1 year gap year between my bachelor's and my master's, and I just thought that was extremely rewarding for me. I was able to get more classroom experience as a substitute teacher, kind of float around the schools, ask questions, and it really helped me decide if I wanted to go into counseling or go further into school psychology. Um, so it really just helped me solidify what I wanted to do and gave me some really important experience that I now think helps me a lot in this program.
And Matt, I think you're bringing up an excellent point. I often recommend when students come to me and ask me possibly a master's program versus a Psy.D versus a PhD, I always ask folks what they want to do with their degree, because there can be multiple avenues to get to a particular job or position. But the other thing I highly recommend, and it's not always feasible in all psychology fields, but if you can shadow somebody who is working in the field, I know I wasn't sure what type of psychology I wanted to be going to graduate school for. And it wasn't until my senior year of college as a psych major that I shadowed a school psychologist and fell in love. I came very close to going into industrial organizational psychology, which is a totally different field, but I went into the school, shadowed a school psychologist, and knew I was applying to graduate school in school psychology. So I do think shadowing experiences can be very beneficial, but again, it doesn't always work in all types of psychology. There's a wonderful question that's in the chat. How much do publications matter on a curriculum vitae when applying to PhD programs, specifically clinical and school? I don't know, Ashley or Dr. Shiner or Dr.
I,
Pollock.
I mentioned it. I mean, like, candidly, I had one publication in progress, but like maybe six research presentation posters when I applied. And I would say my publications, kind of looking at like current CVs of applicants, are on the low end. But I think that, again, like, I think it's really holistic of the application is the perspective I get of like, how good is your like letters of rec? How good is your statement? What's your GPA? What is your research experience? And like if you don't have like if you feel like you're lacking in one area, maybe bolstering the other. Like I think you need that research experience, but I'm not aware that there's like you have zero publications, we won't look at you. I think that it really depends.
And I also think that it's important to recognize that, I mean, for most people who would have publications, that it's not as if they are first authors on them either. I mean, it would be more common perhaps to be an author on a paper that is a collaborative effort.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
questions. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Pollock.
I was just going to say it just really also depends on which program you're applying to. So, like Ashley's program is at what we call like an R1 university where there's like a heavy focus on grant funded research. So, they're going to be looking at that because, they're looking for students that can work in these labs that, have maybe even you as a graduate student would be overseeing undergraduate research assistants. Whereas, for the Psy.D programs where they don't have those types of labs and as much focus on research, they might not be as focused on publications or even some PhD programs that just don't have as much of a focus on, that larger like grant funded research. So it just kind of like depends on the program. And some Psy.D programs might weigh that more heavily. So you have to really do your due diligence in researching these programs, which does take a lot of work, which is another another good reason for a gap year or two, because it can be like a part-time job researching programs and applying. Like that takes a lot of time too. And a lot of college students in their senior year just don't have the time to devote to that.
Excellent. Thank you. There are a number of questions related to GPAs in the chat, related to what is the typical GPA, and I'm not quite sure what average GPAs might be. I would say that that's going to be very school specific, but you should be able to look up that information. And again, like Dr. Pollock was saying, do your research. I will tell you that many of even the master's programs are becoming pretty competitive. Now, keep in mind, GPA is one part of the picture. So, while I would say typically our program, most of our students have 3.4, 3.5 GPAs or higher. We do have some that may have lower GPAs, but did come in with a lot of school-based experience, maybe a lot of work experience, maybe prior work as a teacher. And so we're always looking for the whole picture. And I would argue that PhD and Psy.D programs, they're looking at all pieces. So GPA is just one component of that. But if they're getting 80 applications for potentially 5 or 10 spots, they may set a GPA cutoff. And if your GPA is lower, you might want to consider what you could do to potentially raise that GPA. I know some of my former graduate students who maybe had been placed on a waiting list because their GPA was lower, they were able to audit classes or they were able to, I shouldn't say audit, they took classes and as non-matriculated students and showed that they could earn an A in graduate level courses because some of the fear was that they couldn't handle the academic rigor, but they proved that they could and then reapplied and were able to get into the program. So I don't know if there's an average GPA per se, but I would say it's the holistic view. So if the GPA is weaker, then you really want to bolster some of the other areas.
I'd agree that it's a holistic stance because I forget what my GPA was when I was in the process of applying, and I do think that they had a minimum GPA or like required GPA total for applicants, but the nature of the interviews that I had were mostly about my prior work experience, my current interests, and why I chose that program in particular. Um, they want to know why you want to be there, and they want to know why you chose their program specifically instead of the plethora of other programs that are at your fingertips and that you could have applied to. Um, I know I think someone mentioned that fit is used a lot, and I think although it is used a lot, it's accurate and it's telling to what these faculty at these programs are looking for in applicants.
And it's important. I mean, like the fit is something you want to think about because you're investing a lot of time and money in these programs. And like for example, at the doctoral program at SU, where Ashley is actually a really good fit. And so I think she's pretty happy there. But I've been supervising doctoral students in that program on their clinical work for like 15 years. And I've seen some students over the years that actually probably weren't the best fit for that particular program. Like they might have been a better fit for a different program. And it's really hard for them. So they're looking for fit also to protect you and help you have the best experience you can have there.
And I was just to add to this issue of fit, I think there is the option of potentially reaching out to faculty before you apply to PhD programs. I mean, I would check on their website first to see if they're taking doctoral students that coming year. But when you're pulling together your application, it's really important that it is tailored to that institution, to that program, and to the advisors that you can imagine working with. Um, and so it's important first to check to make sure that that those advisors will be taking graduate students that coming year. But if you've checked on the website, um, if you write a very well-crafted, kind of thoughtful email to express your interest in the program, that can be a good option. I do think you need to be really careful and really thoughtful when you're sending those emails, in the sense that, again, you need to tailor those clearly to demonstrate that you've looked into what kind of research is that lab doing, not just what have they done in the past, but kind of what are they focusing on now. Yeah, just indicating that you've put some effort in before you write to those faculty to ask about or to express your interest in the program.
Are there other questions? So thank you all for participating tonight. We appreciate you being here. We still have a few more minutes where we can answer questions. And before we cover the next question, I just want to notify you that 2 weeks from tonight, we're actually going to be having another SNYPA webinar where we're going to be covering different careers in psychology. And we have many different participants who are going to be joining us, including a neuropsychologist, forensic psychologist, marriage and family therapist. So we'll be sending out the flyer with information about that workshop shortly. Any last questions or comments?
Could I say a few things? I've been compiling a list of things I would like to say, if that's okay, before we go back to questions. One thing that I'm not sure that we've mentioned is I think it's really important for each program that you're considering to look at their rate of placement, successful placement in internships, and also their success rate for graduates who then are looking to be licensed on, so what is the pass rate for the licensure exam? I think it's really important to look at both of those metrics for each school, and they are required to report that information on the website for the program. There is a lot of variability across programs in terms of the success rate of students in those programs in getting internships. I think there's been a big push to increase the number of internships in clinical psych in the times, certainly since I was there. So I think that it's not as competitive to get an internship, but I still think there's quite a bit of variability across programs. So you don't, yeah, I mean, I think it would be risky to attend a program that does not have a good internship placement rate. So that was one thing. Another that I sort of feel like we've said, but maybe just to reiterate it, is that when you're thinking about advisors that you may want to apply to work with, you can kind of think about it as a Venn diagram of where you're trying to find this kind of sweet spot between their interest in the one circle and then your interest in the other circle, in the sense that you don't have to have exactly the same interests, but you have to be able to think about how your interests can fit into the program that they are currently working on. So it's not like you're being sort of hired to execute a program of research that is totally dictated by the faculty person. But on the other hand, you have to be able to figure out what you want to pursue can be done within the context of one or two of the labs in a particular program. So you're thinking about that kind of Venn diagram of the advisor interests and your interests and the place where those two things meet. I guess the other thing that I did want to say is I feel like every time I participate in one of these panels, it probably leads to an increase in the stress of the participants who are watching it, and sort of this expectation that you're moving on to this terrifying stage of life. And I guess I just want to say, if you pick the right kind of program and you are the right fit for the program, I actually think graduate school can be a lot of fun. I mean, I was initially terrified, absolutely terrified, and had a lot of imposter syndrome when I got there. And I looked around at the other people who had been admitted with me. But once I got over that, I realized that this was just incredibly fun. I got to try out all of these different things. I was able to work with all these different populations of people, kinds of people that I had never encountered before. And that was very moving to me. Getting to teach and then discovering I loved it. Really discovering my own passion for research. Anyhow, this is all just to say that I hope that we have not just made you feel stressed, but that we have kind of opened up possibilities for exciting things that you can pursue. And I think there's every reason to hope that you could really enjoy being in graduate school.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Dr. Shiner is saying, and I'm so glad you brought that up because we don't want people to leave here stressed and actually look, people to leave here optimistic because there are, the field of mental health is huge. And there's so many opportunities, like in 2 weeks from now, we're gonna even talk about more opportunities beyond just what we've been talking about tonight. So I always tell my students, like, look, where there's a will, there's a way. Like you'll figure out a way to be able to do what you want to do, whether it's becoming a psychotherapist or working with kids in a school or whatever it is. It's just sometimes it takes a little legwork to figure out what's the particular right path for you. But there's so many pathways and options. And I'll echo what Dr. Shiner said. I loved graduate school. I look back on it as like one of the best times in my life. It was really busy, but yeah, it was great. And yeah, you should leave with some optimism, I hope.
And I would also argue that you become, if done right, you become very close with the other uh, folks in your cohort. One of the individuals I went to graduate school with was in my wedding. I still keep in touch with her 25 years later. She's one of my best friends. Another one I'm writing a book with, somebody I went to graduate school with. So I think there's a bond because everybody's kind of going through it together at the same time. And so they kind of understand what you're going through. And I would kind of concur. Graduate school was, I loved college, I loved graduate school, and it was a nice kind of transition before going into the working world. So I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to ask for any final comments from our panelists. And I do just want to emphasize too, there is a mental health shortage. I mean, we need strong practitioners. So, please, all of you are obviously considering a field in psychology or a psychology related field, and you are all in need. There are lots of job opportunities. So please consider graduate school, consider this field because folks need you. But any final comments from panelists or any final questions?
This is a very random comment, but I think similar to Dr. Shiner talking about like looking at pass rates for the EPPP and also like APIC placements. Anyone that's concerned about like GPA for a site, they also, from my recollection when I was applying, post that. There's like usually a section that has a PDF that talks about like the people who successfully entered the program and then also outcomes from the program. So you can kind of learn more about that for the specific program you want. And I think like searching for the program, people are talking about that. I think that it's really hard to like know that. I think that that's okay that like you're thinking about it and doing these things and trying to figure it out. And I think like everyone said, if you find what you want to do, like it is really fun. It's a lot of work, but like I'm very close with my cohort. We get through it together. I feel like I have learned not only like so much about the job, but about myself through like the time in graduate school. It's such like an interesting time in your life and you're doing so many different things. I think if you want to do it, it is really important. And also if you don't, like that's okay. Like Dr. Pollack talked about some people who aren't good fits, and that is really unfortunate when that happens, but like nothing is forever. If you start something and it doesn't work out for you, like college, like you can pivot, or like you get into it and like you said, you find teaching that you really love, or you find a population you love that you never learned about. So I think being open to it and realizing like if it's important to you, like it'll work and you'll find a way to make it happen is important.
And as you applied to graduate school, I would recommend applying to more than one program because, first of all, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but also, you should be just like they may be interviewing you for a spot. You also want to be finding out, going to the interviews and finding out if they're a good fit for you because like Dr. Pollack said, you are going to be investing a lot of time and money. So you want to make sure that it's the right decision for you. Any final comments from our panelists?
Just, sorry.
No, I was just going to say probably what you were going to say, that we just stuck some resources in the chat.
No, that wasn't what I was going to say.
Okay.
That you highlighted that. Those links will also link you to other links, so you'll have a whole web of different good resources to go to. But I know we kind of said this, but I just also want to make sure it's really clear that because a lot of students want to become therapists. And so there's, in addition to all the pathways we've talked about tonight, there's like at least 4 or 5 other at least pathways if you want to become a licensed therapist. And so in the panel in 2 weeks, if you want to know about what are some of those other pathways, for example, a licensed clinical social worker, licensed clinical mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist, which are all master's level pathways that lead to licensure, including like you can set up a private practice if that's what you want to do, just, have a private practice where you do psychotherapy. So there's even more avenues outside of this that we're talking about tonight as well.
And that the link that I put in the chat is to this guide that is called Mitch's Uncensored Guide to Graduate Programs in
Okay.
Clinical Psychology, which I've been recommending forever. It's by Mitch Prinstein, who is actually now, he was a faculty person, but now he's the science director at the American Psychological Association. It begins by actually describing different options if you want to do direct clinical work. So before it dives into talking about clinical or counseling PhD programs, it talks briefly about masters in social work or licensed mental health counselors, and it gives you links to good resources for those different options as well. So even if you're not interested in a PhD, that is a great source to start with to learn a little bit more about some of these other options as well.
All right. So thank you again for joining us tonight. Now, many of our participants, especially the grad students, have put their email addresses into the chat. So thank you for that. And please feel free to reach out to them if you have further questions. And just to do one final plug for our CNYPA presentation coming up in 2 weeks, it's going to be covering different careers in psychology. And as was mentioned previously, we are going to be having a marriage and family therapist, a licensed mental health counselor. We have a forensic psychologist, a neuropsychologist, a school social worker. So I think I'm forgetting one, but the flyer for that is going to be coming out shortly. And we hope that you can join us. Thank you again to all of our panelists. We appreciate you being here. We know you're all very busy in graduate school for those of you who are students, and so we're very grateful for your time. For those in case you joined late and weren't able to hear the whole presentation, this is going to be posted on the CNYPA website, and feel free to recommend it to friends. But we hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you.